Hi, and welcome to Mr. Fisher's Science Podcasts. This podcast is on biodiversity and sustainability. So the variety of organisms that we find in an ecosystem is known as biodiversity. And biodiversity is a very useful indicator of an ecosystem's stability and health. Ecosystems that are stable and healthy will have a large number and variety of species. So different types of organisms different types of ecosystems have different numbers of organisms present. So if we look at an example like a rainforest has large numbers of species found at each trophic level. Rainforests tend to be very stable in terms of their ecosystems. Something like the tundra, though, has very few species, and so it's very vulnerable. Now, as a good indicator of environmental change, scientists look at ecosystems that are more vulnerable, like the tundra. Now, each organism has what's called an ecological niche, and this is sort of the role or the job the organism plays in the ecosystem. So if we look at this example here of warblers, we can see that these different species of warblers actually occupy different areas of the tree, and in that case, that is their ecological niche. Now, biodiversity of an ecosystem can also change throughout the year. So for example, we don't see that many mosquitoes or robins here in Canada in the wintertime. The wintertime has low biodiversity. Now, also biodiversity is affected by human activity. When we clear cut, when we damage an ecosystem, or when we just do things like hunting, we can also reduce the biodiversity in an environment. And that brings us to sustainability, because environments that are stable and healthy are also sustainable, meaning that they're renewable. They can continue without the addition of new materials. The biodiversity of a grassland, for example, like the following picture right here, is a lot different than someone's backyard lawn. In the grassland, different plants can fix nitrogen. We find a variety of insects living there, and energy in that ecosystem can flow very easily. Grasslands are considered, a lawn is considered a monoculture. A monoculture meaning only one type of plant is present. Now, grass is not a very good nitrogen fixer at all. So in other words, in order to maintain this really nice, healthy lawn here, we need to add fertilizers. Monocultures are also susceptible to pests. And so as a result, we need to add things like herbicides to keep weeds, insecticides to reduce insects. Okay, so monocultures are not sustainable. Now, populations tend to fluctuate, and remember they fluctuate determined by the carrying capacity of an ecosystem. Now, when the carrying capacity changes, because the ecosystem changes, populations can increase or decrease. Now, the decrease in populations, or the decline in a population, can lead to that species disappearing. And this is where we get at-risk species. Okay? And we're going to look at the different categories next on at-risk species. So the first classification for an at-risk species is vulnerable. So this is a species that is at risk because it has lower declining numbers. So an example would be these guys here, the gray fox, which lives in southern Ontario. In some of its areas, it's got very low numbers. So they are considered to be vulnerable. Now, the second classification is threatened. This is a species that's likely to become endangered if we do not reverse factors that make it vulnerable. So, for example, wood bison don't have a lot of natural habitat left. As a result, they are on the threatened classification list. The third classification is a little different. These are extirpated species. These are species that no longer exist in one part of a country but exist in other parts. So for example, the grizzly bear used to be very prominent in prairie provinces. Now we don't find the grizzly bear in the prairies at all. Instead we find it in the mountains, British Columbia. The grizzly bear is an extirpated species in the Canadian provinces. Fourth level is endangered. This is a species that's close to extinction in all parts of Canada or in a very large region. So for example, the eastern cougar is very, very rare, and so it's classified as an endangered species. The fifth level is where we do not want species to be, and that's extinct. This is a species that's no longer found anywhere else on the earth. So the blue walleye, for example, is a species of fish that was once found in the Great Lakes and no longer exists. Extinctions are a huge deal, and should one species in an ecosystem go extinct, the entire food web may be jeopardized. So extinctions disturb predator-prey relations. And we can see on this food web, by removing a species, we can really disrupt the flow of energy in that ecosystem. And so this is where species extinctions become a big deal. The removal of one species can have a significant impact on local ecosystems. And that's our podcast on biodiversity and sustainability, and I hope that was helpful.